Good evening. Welcome to the Three Deeper Cuts podcast, your lifestyle magazine for the practicing surgical pathologist. I am your host, Chuck G. Every week, we bring you something to think about, something to read, or something to listen to. Three Deeper Cuts is brought to you by Formalin Fixed, paraffin-embedded tissue. Emphasis on the formalin. Because without the high exposure to 10% buffer neutral formalin that I experienced during my 4 years of residency in St. Louis, I wouldn't be able to think about half the things that show up here on Three Deeper Cuts podcast. I streamlined this podcast for you. I started to trim down a lot of the fluff, a lot of the spoken word stuff, keeping it high signal as much as possible. But from time to time, I'm just going to check in with you. So, how are you doing? I'm doing great. This is an essay by Paul Graham, founder of Combinator. The essay is called How to Do Great Work. It was written in July 2023. I don't know that much else about Paul Graham other than he's a tech founder, computer engineer. But he wrote this essay for people in any industry, in any line of work. And the purpose of this podcast is to benefit the physician 5 years behind me. And I wish that at 25 years old, someone had read this essay to me, because this is just such a powerful essay. I think it's applicable to anyone, especially if you're research-minded. Definitely if you're research-minded, I think this would help you. But I think if you're not research-minded, I knew I wanted to be a worker bee doctor and then pursue my hobbies on the side, exercise, traveling, this and that. I knew I wanted to do all those things. And I didn't quite know how, but this essay definitely is action-focused, and it will give you some guidelines. So let's get into it. How to Do Great Work by Paul Graham. If you collected lists of techniques for doing great work in a lot of different fields, what would the intersection look like? I decided to find out by making it. Partly my goal was to create a guide that could be used by someone working in any field. But I was also curious about the shape of the intersection. And one thing this exercise shows is that it does have a definite shape. It's not just a point labeled work hard. The following recipe assumes you're very ambitious. That's a critical statement right there. The first step is to decide what to work on. The work you choose needs to have three qualities. It has to be something that you have a natural aptitude for, that you have a deep interest in, and that offers scope to do great work. In practice, you don't have to worry too much about the third criterion. Ambitious people are, if anything, already too conservative about it. So all you need to do is find something you have an aptitude for and great interest in. That sounds straightforward, but it's often quite difficult. When you're young, you don't know what you're good at or what different kinds of work are like. Some kinds of work you end up doing may not even exist yet. So while some people know what they want to do at 14, most have to figure it out. The way to figure out what to work on is by working. If you're not sure what to work on, guess. But pick something and get going. You'll probably guess wrong some of the time, but that's fine. It's good to know about multiple things. Some of the biggest discoveries come from noticing connections from different fields. Develop a habit of working on your own projects. Don't let, quote, work mean something other people tell you to do. If you do manage to do great work one day, it will probably be on a project of your own. It may be within some bigger project, but you'll be driving your part of it. What should your projects be? Whatever seems to you excitingly ambitious. As you grow older and your taste in projects evolves, exciting and important will converge. At 7, it may seem excitingly ambitious to build huge things out of Lego. Then at 14, to teach yourself calculus. Till at 21, you're starting to explore unanswered questions in physics. but always preserve excitingness. There's a kind of I want to pause here. So I was talking to a few friends, and they were asking me if I had considered opening a med spa with my medical license. And they were talking amongst themselves of they had a friend who was in internal medicine in Southern California, and he was talking about how he had made more in the last 5 years running a few med spas compared to his practice at an HMO. And I asked my friend, I was like, if you're thinking about doing this, is that something that you're excessively curious about and relentlessly excited about? And he kind of gave me like a mixed answer. And what I realized is that medicine does that to you if you're not careful. You have to be so agreeable and obedient for such a long period of time that a lot of people, when they get to the point where they do have a little bit of runway to build something on the side, they don't even know if they're excited about it or not. They don't know how to distinguish mimesis, or just copying other people's behaviors, from what they're truly interested in. And one thing I've learned, I mean, I just turned 40, so it's like you don't have a lot of time on this earth. So by all means, I'm not saying that all work needs to be glamorous. At the end of the day, you got to pay your bills. And there is a fraction of medical work that is just paying the bills. It is somewhat tedious, but you got to do it. And you can build a great business doing boring service work. I think that's fantastic. It's not boring if you need the money. That's all I'm saying. So I'm not knocking boring service businesses. I'm actually celebrating boring service businesses, because making money is interesting, especially if you don't have it. So, but the reason that I just bring that up is because these are the questions that I'm asking myself as I bring new guests on the podcast. I have to genuinely be curious about them. Stuff that I'm writing, the book that I'm working on, is it genuinely exciting to me? Otherwise, it's definitely not going to be exciting to the reader. And I think you have a finite amount of brain cells available to do uninteresting work. And that's what leads to burnout. So you have to be aware of it during your training pipeline to become a physician, that you don't start agreeing to stuff that you're not actually excited about it, and you're just doing it to chase clout or to chase status and prestige. Let's keep going. There's a kind of excited curiosity that both the engine and the rudder of that's both the engine and the rudder of great work. It will not only drive you, but if you let it have its way, it will also show you what to work on. What are you excessively curious about? Curious to a degree that would bore most other people. That's what you're looking for. Once you've found something you're excessively interested in, the next step is to learn enough about it to get you to one of the frontiers of knowledge. Knowledge expands fractally, and from a distance its edges look smooth. But once you learn enough to get close to one, they turn out to be full of gaps. The next step is, so right now in this industry, it's AI in medicine, which I think is very interesting, because you have an opportunity to prevent physician burnout by automating the tasks that are painfully boring. So in the era of AI in medicine, I'm extremely bullish on the skill set of being a physician. I'm bearish on being a mid-level, because they're the first ones that are going to get automated. The entry-level questions that you're doing for a screening of primary care physical with, minimal complications, that is going to be automated by AI, and it should be. There's no need for a human being to do that. But that makes it more exciting if you're a physician that actually knows what can go wrong with a misdiagnosis and you know how to retrain the algo. This is going to need to be, I think the people that are curious about this in med school will end up having very exciting, lucrative careers, being a liaison between the tech industry and clinical practice. I think. I could be wrong, but I think that's the direction it's heading. So he's talking about gaps in knowledge. The next step is to notice them. This takes some skill, because your brain wants to ignore such gaps in order to make a simpler model of the world. Many discoveries have come from asking questions about things that everyone else took for granted. If the answer seems strange, so much the better. Great work often has a tincture of strangeness. You see this from painting to math. It would be affected to try to manufacture it, but if it appears, embrace it. Boldly chase outlier ideas, even if other people aren't interested in them. In fact, especially if they aren't. If you're excited about some possibility that everyone else ignores, and you have enough expertise to say precisely what they're all overlooking, that's as good a bet as you'll find. 4 steps. Choose a field. Learn enough to get to the frontier. Notice gaps. Explore promising ones. This is how practically everyone who's done great work has done it, from painters to physicists. Steps 2 and 4 will require hard work. It may not be possible to prove that you have to work hard to do great things, but the empirical evidence is on the scale of the evidence for mortality. That's why it's essential to work on something you're deeply interested in. Interest will drive you to work harder than mere diligence ever could. The 3 most powerful motives are curiosity, delight, and the desire to do something impressive. Sometimes they converge, and that combination is the most powerful of all. The big prize is to discover a new fractal bud. You notice a crack in the surface of knowledge. Pry it open, and there's a whole world inside. So I'm just noticing that, like, as I'm reading this essay, it comes so naturally to me because I've actually written this out by hand. I can't remember if I finished writing it out, the whole thing, but I have like a little copy book that I stashed in my backpack, and I just noticed as I was cleaning up my office that this notebook was in there, and I had written, it basically was half full of me writing out this essay. So I think that's why I just know this essay so well, and it's just rolling off the tongue per se, because I'm so excited about it, and it's helped me focus my life so much. Let's talk a little bit more about the complicated business of figuring out what to work on. The main reason it's hard is that you can't tell what most kinds of work are like except by doing them, which means the 4 steps overlap. You may have to work at something for years before you know how much you like it or how good you are at it. And in the meantime, you're not doing and thus not learning about most other kinds of work. So in the worst case, choose late based on very incomplete information. The nature of ambition exacerbates this problem. Ambition comes in 2 forms, one that precedes interest in the subject and one that grows out of it. Most people who do great work have a mix, and the more you have of the former, the harder it will be to decide what to do. The educational systems in most countries pretend it's easy. They expect you to commit to a field long before you know what it's really like. And as a result, an ambitious person on an optimal trajectory will often read to the system as an instance of breakage. It would be better if they at least admitted it. If they admitted that the system could not only can't do much to help you figure out what to work on, but is designed on the assumption that you'll somehow magically guess as a teenager. They don't tell you, but I will. Sometimes it comes to figuring out what to work on. You're on your own. I would triple highlight that. I think I actually did highlight this, but I just printed out a fresh copy and my highlights aren't here. But I would like triple highlight that, tear it out, paste it on the wall, get it tattooed across your knuckles, because no one's going to tell you this when you're in undergrad or med school or all of that, or any of these credentialism defined careers. Credentialism is dying. So the people that win in society are the people that are doing what they are relentlessly curious about and excited about. And it doesn't matter what that is. I'm excited about some stuff that's like really boring to a lot of other people, you know? There's people that are really excited about plumbing, about carpentry, about masonry, about roofing, about power washing. And honestly, those are the kids that are going to be making doctor level salaries because there's such a shortage in those fields. So you could become interested in a lot of things, but I think you just have to you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to just come out and say it, because the education system is not being honest with you, as he just got done saying. You're on your own. Some people get lucky and do guess correctly, but the rest will find themselves scrambling diagonally across tracks laid down on the assumption that everyone does. So what should you do if you're young and ambitious and don't know what to work on? What you should not do is drift along passively, assuming the problem will solve itself. You need to take action, but there is no systematic procedure you can follow. When you read biographies of people who've done great work, it is remarkable how much luck is involved. They discover what to work on as the result of a chance meeting or by reading a book they happen to pick up. So you need to make yourself a big target for luck. And the way to do that is to be curious. Try lots of things, meet lots of people, read lots of books, ask lots of questions. One of the people that I really admire on this is there's an ophthalmologist out in like Oregon. His name's Glaucom Flecken, and he's almost like Bob Newhart. And I was reminded about this because I'm just reading this book called Seriously Funny, which is a story of a bunch of the kind of renegade comedians and performers and radio performers of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Before the MTV generation, basically. And they talk about Bob Newhart. And what's interesting is that Bob Newhart's, so he was like he's basically the only person in history that was doing telephone comedy. And so he never actually went on the road. That's the interesting thing about Bob Newhart. He was never a road comic, as in like a stand-up comedian. In fact, he didn't even want to perform when he first started out. I think he was so he failed out of law school, and then he ended up being an accountant. And I think he was in some degree program at Loyola in Chicago. And he got a job as a stagehand at a local theater, and he would just write these monologues but never perform them. But then at the backstage parties, like the after parties or the barbecues, he would just be making his friends laugh. And everyone would keep telling him, hey, you should perform these. Like, you could have your own show. And he just didn't want to, but he just kept writing because he found the work interesting and exciting. And, skip ahead 10 years, he ends up getting his own show. But if you watch the show, he doesn't actually talk to the audience directly like Johnny Carson or, Lenny Bruce or any of the, like a normal comedian does. He just does his monologue. Like, he's talking into a phone at like a fictional character, and he's just pointing out the macabre, annoyances of living in the modern world. And it's hilarious. And the modern equivalent that, at least in my industry, is this internet comedian named Will Flannery. And I know he does speaking events and everything. I've never seen the guy live. I don't think he's that funny in person, but he's hilarious in video. And like him just talking on the phone is just brilliant. So anyways, I'm inspired by that guy. What else do we got here? Okay. Read lots of books, ask lots of questions. That's fantastic. So a tip here would be throw away the television. When I moved down to Houston for my fellowship, I never unpacked the television that I had in my house in St. Louis. That was the best decision I've ever made in my life because it got me obsessed with reading, writing, and recording, like I'm doing now. So now whenever I have some downtime, I'm not binge watching Netflix. I'm doing something that I actually want to do, that I'm excited about. But you have to you got to stop consuming like addictive material. You know what I mean? I should say books in a way are addictive too, but it's a much healthier addiction because books reading is like forced meditation. It calms down your nervous system. And the same thing with writing. Same thing with like speaking and recording. You know what I mean? It's like a different type of addiction. You're addicted to the work. And that's that's like healthier as long as you're not neglecting your family. But Paul Graham talks about that in like another essay where he talks about like never neglect love, health and love or something like that. Sleep, health, and love. So, okay. When in doubt, optimize for interestingness. Fields change as you learn more about them. What mathematicians do, for example, is very different from what you do in high school math classes. So you need to give different types of work a chance to show you what they're like. But fields should become increasingly interesting as you learn more about it. If it doesn't, it probably isn't for you. Don't worry if you find you're interested in different things than other people. The stranger your tastes in interestingness, the better. Strange tastes are often strong ones, and strong tastes for work means you'll be productive, and you're more likely to find new things if you're looking where few have looked before. One sign that you're suited for some kind of work is when you like even the parts that other people find tedious or frightening. But fields aren't people. You don't owe them any loyalty. If in the course of working on one thing, you discover another, that's more exciting. Be afraid to switch. Let me read that again. If in the course of working on one thing, you discover another that's more exciting, don't be afraid to switch. So I ran into this when I was learning psychopharmacology as a psych resident. I did 6 months of a psych residency at the Naval Hospital in San Diego. And I was very naive. I was very, kind of immature back then. I didn't really know what was going on, but I was getting bored with the material. It just wasn't challenging enough for me. And I was getting restless. And I also didn't like the idea of rampant use of active medication in the United States. It's being pushed really hard by the pharmaceutical industry, and outside of psychotic disorders and severe mood disorders like bipolar, outside of the extreme circumstances, they actually do more harm than good. I think we don't need to get into a diatribe about mental health in this country. We can bring on some real professionals in that field in future episodes. But suffice to say, I pivoted away from that field. Now, to be perfectly honest, I had to, because I was kind of butting heads with my program director at the time. But it stemmed from finding the work just unengaging. So don't be afraid to switch. If you're making something for people, make sure it's something they actually want. The best way to do this is to make something you yourself want. Write the story you want to read. Build the tool that you want to use. Since your friends probably have similar interests, this will also get you your initial audience. So I guess for the purpose of this podcast, I just kind of stumbled across, basically just making episodes to help the 20-something resident physician, material that was not taught to me, but I thought it was just invaluable for surviving in medicine and not getting burned out. Because as you all know, burnout is becoming a very serious problem with corporatization of healthcare in the United States, and it looks like it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I met a guy along the way, and maybe he'll be on a future episode. But I met a guy who he said something that I really like. He said, "I think side hustle should be a course in medical school," and I just couldn't agree with that more. I think the days of training medical students to be these obedient kind of just rule followers, I think that is that's going to be a recipe for disaster. I think med students should actually be giving you the scaffolding to be a competent practitioner on the one hand, but it should also leave you some leeway to understand the business side of medicine and to carve out your own little business, in practice and in whatever endeavor you have, whether that's writing books, in academia, or whatever it is, but that you have ownership on. Because I think the lack of entrepreneurial culture in medicine is what kind of got us into this problem, where other parties are basically vampiring. They're acting like vampires on the skill of medicine, because doctors don't really advocate for themselves. So anyways, now let's get back to the essay. This should follow from the excitingness rule. Obviously, the most exciting story to write will be the one you want to read. The reason I mention this case explicitly is that so many people get it wrong. Instead of making what they want, they try to make what some imaginary, more sophisticated audience wants. And once you go down that route, you're lost. There are a lot of forces that will lead you astray when you're trying to figure out what to work on. Pretentiousness, fashion, fear, money, politics, other people's wishes, eminent frauds. But if you stick to what you genuinely find interesting, you'll be proof against all of them. If you're interested, you're not astray. So when he talks about eminent frauds, I mean, in my industry, the first thing that comes to mind is Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. Yeah, you don't want to do that. Would not recommend. I think it's gosh, I think you just have to surround yourself with honest people that keep you in check. And I don't come from the VC world. I don't understand how all that stuff works, but I do know that if you're at a place like Stanford and you're convincing enough, you can just convince people to give you money. Again, I don't understand it. I don't come from that world. I come from more of a community practice, a blue collar world. So I don't know. There you have it. Don't be a fucking fraud, and don't be a piece of shit. I think what I've noticed is a lot of these issues where you just have these sociopathic liars, in business or in medicine. There's these are just psych cases, dude. They don't apply to most of us. I would argue that most of us are just trying to find our way and just trying to do good work and provide for our families. The sociopaths are kind of a minority, but maybe that cutthroat Silicon Valley culture self-selects for that. Either way, I don't really want to be a part of that. I'm just trying to do my own thing with these podcasts. And with following your interests may sound like a rather passive strategy, but in practice, it usually means following them past all sorts of obstacles. You usually have to risk rejection and failure. So it does take a good deal of boldness. But while you do need boldness, you don't usually need much planning. In most cases, the recipe for doing great work is simply work hard on excitingly ambitious projects, and something good will come of it. Instead of making a plan and then executing it, you just try to preserve certain invariants. The trouble with planning is that it only works for achievements that you can describe in advance. You can win a gold medal or get rich by deciding to as a child and then tenaciously pursuing that goal, but you can't discover natural selection that way. I think for most people who want to do great work, the right strategy is not to plan too much. At each stage, do whatever seems most interesting and gives you the best options for the future. I call this approach staying upwind. This is how most people who've done great work seem to have done it. So, applied to myself, I intentionally keep my schedule very open. I used to just say yes to stuff and just fill my day up with meetings and, climbing up the totem pole. And I just realized that it was just cramping my creativity style. So now applied to this podcast, I keep a scaffolding in place of guests that are coming down the pipeline, but also leave some leeway for, freestyle episodes like this one, where, I'm just reading something that I think is very valuable, that has been very valuable to me and that I'd like to share with you. And then just adding my own personal experience, life stories from it. So the first 30 episodes of this podcast, I was actually getting a little bit burned out. And so I knew I needed to kind of space out and go a little bit slower to keep some wiggle room for some creative writing too. Because, the real reason I started this is that I wanted to do some creative writing projects, and I'm working on a book. But I also had this interest to doing the personal development podcast, and also I wanted to just build an audience. I don't want to write a book and not have an audience to offer it to. So that's where I was at. Even if you found something exciting to work on, it is not always straightforward. There will be times when some new idea makes you leap out of bed in the morning and get straight to work. But there will also be plenty of times when things aren't like that. You don't just put out your sail and get blown forward by inspiration. There are headwinds and currents and hidden shoals. So there's a technique to working, just as there is to sailing. For example, while you must work hard, it's impossible to work too hard. It's possible to work too hard. And if you do that, you'll find you get diminishing returns. Fatigue will make you stupid and eventually even damage your health. The point at which work yields diminishing returns depends on the type. Some of the hardest types you might only be able to do for 4 or 5 hours a day. Ideally, those hours will be contiguous. To the extent you can, try to arrange your life so that you have big blocks of time to work in. You'll shy away from hard tasks if you know you might be interrupted. This is so critical. This is the reason that I left clinical medicine. I hated having a day that was just scheduled back to back to back to back with just clinic visits. It was just dumb and just constant interruptions. It's impossible to build anything. It's impossible to write anything unless you're in academia and they give you set time. But usually you can't. You got to do what they want you to do. So you know what I'm saying? You have to pick a job that is inherently suited to your personality. So for me, I picked a job where I actually can get some writing done. I could do some podcast stuff on my backup days. I think other fields in medicine that would be good to check out would be a hospitalist or a part-time hospitalist or a part-time urgent care gig, I personally wouldn't like it because I don't really like shift work. That would probably burn me out. But the upshot is that, I know a guy who works I think he works 1 week a month. Now, granted, his spouse is working too. I don't have that luxury right now. I'm the sole provider for my family, but I enjoy that. It makes me very happy to do that. But you got to tailor it to what's right for you. And by the way, take everything I say with a fistful of salt because I'm just figuring this out as I go. This is like a building in public episode of 3 Deeper Cuts, if you will. Let's get on with it here. You'll shy away from hard tasks if you know you might be interrupted. That's very true. It will probably be harder to start working than to keep working. You'll often have to trick yourself to get over that initial threshold. Don't worry about this. It's the nature of the work, not a flaw in your character. Work has a sort of activation energy, both per day and per project. And since this threshold is fake in the sense that it's higher than the energy required to keep going, it's okay to tell yourself a lie of corresponding magnitude to get over it. It's usually a mistake to lie to yourself if you want to do great work, but this is one of the rare cases where it isn't. When I'm reluctant to start work in the morning, I often trick myself by saying, I'll just read over what I've got so far. 5 minutes later, I found something that seems mistaken or incomplete, and I'm off. Similar techniques work for starting new projects. It's okay to lie to yourself about how much work a project will entail, for example. Lots of great things begin with someone saying, how hard could it be? This is one case where the young have an advantage. They're more optimistic, and even though one of the sources of their optimism is ignorance, in this case, ignorance can sometimes beat knowledge. Try to finish what you start, though even if it turns out to be more work than you expected. Finishing things is not just an exercise in tidiness or self-discipline. In many projects, a lot of the best work happens in what was meant to be the final stage. Another permissible lie is to exaggerate the importance of what you're working on, at least in your own mind. If that helps you discover something new, it may turn out not to have been a lie after all. God, it's so badass. I fucking love that. Because there are 2 senses of starting work, per day and per project. There are also 2 forms of procrastination. Per project procrastination is far more dangerous. Now I understand that, okay? So that's procrastinating on the book that you're working on. Yup. You put off starting that ambitious project from year to year because the time isn't quite right. When you're procrastinating in units of years, you can get a lot not done. One reason per project procrastination is so dangerous is that it usually camouflages itself as work. You're not just sitting around doing nothing. You're working industriously on something else. So per project procrastination doesn't set off the alarms that per day procrastination does. You're too busy to notice it. The way to beat it is to stop occasionally and ask yourself, am I working on what I most want to work on? When you're young, it's okay if the answer is sometimes no, but this gets increasingly dangerous as you get older. So you could have a laugh at me because I'm like actively struggling with this, right? Because I'm kind of 50-50 between fiction and nonfiction. On the one hand, I love just sitting down and like working on this fiction graphic novel about the lab industry. On the other hand, I'm also love doing, nonfiction book reports and interviewing people for this production. So I toggle back and forth. But I also, you know what I'm saying? Like, I gotta balance this out so that I'm doing both, and that, and I'm really being honest with myself that I'm not just building castles in the sky, that I'm actually doing something that I really want to do, because I think that's endlessly sustainable. It's impossible to be burned out if you're just honestly doing what you want to do. Kids inherently understand this. Like today, my son was doing a jigsaw puzzle. The kid, he's 5 years old. He was like laser focused on this jigsaw puzzle for, I think it was like 2 or 3 hours. It was like free babysitting and no iPad, And I think sometimes as adults we lose that because we get into the professional world and we start doing things because we have to, right? It's like that research paper that you did in residency, Some people, like I know people that are just relentlessly curious about research and they stay in academia and they are just great, authors of scientific papers. That's fantastic. But a lot of people, including myself, I mean, I did what I had to do, just to have a strong CV so that I would get a good job. But I would be lying if I said that that's what I really wanted to work on. And it's not without cost. It's like, yeah, now you have a job and everything, but it's not without cost, because every time you agree to do something at the cost of something else that you really want to do, you're wiring the wrong neural pathways, in my opinion. You're wiring the wrong neural pathway. You're wiring the correct neural pathways for like 30 years ago, the age of credentialism. But that era is crumbling. Now the people that are going to get ahead are the people that are doing what they really want to do. And they're not chasing status and prestige anymore because those days are over, right? So he's talking about 2 types of procrastination. So the solution, so this deserves a highlight. Am I working on what I most want to work on? I think it's really important to keep asking yourself that. I would argue that the more you ask yourself that early on in your medical career, the less likely you are going to be burned out. I think that's the nature of the beast. Just because something is hard does not necessarily mean it's going to be well compensated. That's why I left clinical medicine. I'll stay in pathology, for the foreseeable future because I find it interesting and it pays well, and it affords me, a good lifestyle and stability for my family. But building on the internet, if you're actually solving someone's problem, is like exponential growth. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so just because practicing medicine is hard doesn't mean that it's necessarily well paid. So you should know that from day one of medical school. A lot of physicians are not motivated by money, and that's fine. I wasn't either at the beginning. I wasn't either. And I noticed like this, I'm kind of getting off topic here, but I think it's important. I noticed kind of like this snobby kind of this just shitty anti-business attitude in medicine. Medicine has become like very leftist, and there's this like attitude among like academics of like, well, I'm above money, I can't be bothered with such, trifling matters. I've heard people talk like this, and I think it's it ends up sabotaging the profession as a whole. Because money is a good thing. Making money is fun. It's not something that should be like frowned upon. It's dumb. You can make money and help people too. Frankly, patients are so frustrated with the healthcare system right now that they would gladly pay cash to see a concierge doctor who actually spends like 2 hours taking a history and physical and listens to them and provides a customized treatment plan versus paying, they get ripped off by health systems anyways, and they get stuck with like some mid-level who doesn't know what they're doing. And then, gets them all these extra expensive tests that they didn't really plan on getting in the first place. So I think this is the modern dilemma in medicine, and this generation has to fix it somehow. Nobody really knows how, but it's going to be the interplay of regulators, the free market, and possibly blockchain technology. But that's a topic for another podcast. Let's get back to the essay. Great work usually entails spending what would seem to most people an unreasonable amount of time on a problem. You can't think of this time as a cost, or it will seem too high. You have to find the work sufficiently engaging as it's happening. There may be some jobs where you have to work diligently for years at things you hate before you get to the good part. But this is not how great work happens. Great work happens by focusing consistently on something you're genuinely interested in. When you pause to take stock, you're surprised at how far you've come. The reason we're surprised is that we underestimate the cumulative effect of work. Writing a page a day doesn't sound like much, but if you do it every day, you'll write a book a year. Arnold talks about that in his book too. I fucking love that. That's the key, consistency. People who do great things don't get a lot done every day. They get something done rather than nothing. If you do work that compounds, you'll get exponential growth. Most people who do this do it unconsciously, but it's worth stopping to think about. Learning, for example, is an instance of this phenomenon. The more you learn about something, the easier it is to learn more. Growing an audience is another. The more fans you have, the more new fans they'll bring you. The trouble with exponential growth is that the curve feels flat in the beginning. It isn't. It's still a wonderful exponential curve, but we can't grasp that intuitively, so we underrate the exponential growth in its early stages. Something that grows exponentially can become so valuable that it's worth making an extraordinary effort to get it started. But since we underrate exponential growth early on, this too is mostly done unconsciously. People push through the initial unrewarding phase of learning something new because they know from experience that learning new things always takes an initial push. Or they grow their audience one fan at a time because they have nothing better to do. If people consciously realized they could invest in exponential growth, many more would do it. The first thing that comes to mind is like those early Joe Rogan podcasts or like the early Jocko podcasts. Now you look back on like 15 years of Jocko podcasts or Joe Rogan podcasts, and it's like a university course. Like there's so much valuable information there. There's been segments of each one of those podcasts that like I've re-listened to, like when I'm in a slump, and I just need some perspective. There's been excerpts from audiobooks that I've re-listened to when I'm in a slump. And the people that produce those things are exactly where I want to be 20 years from now. Work doesn't just happen when you're trying to. There's a kind of undirected thinking you do when walking or taking a shower or lying in bed that can be very powerful. By letting your mind wander a little, you'll often solve problems you were unable to solve by frontal attack. You have to be working hard in the normal way to benefit from this phenomenon, though. You can't just walk around daydreaming. The daydreaming has to be interleaved with deliberate work that feeds it questions. Everyone knows to avoid distractions at work, but it's also important to avoid them in the other half of the cycle. When you let your mind wander, it wanders to whatever you care about most at that moment. So avoid the kind of distraction that pushes your work out of that top spot, or you'll waste this valuable type of thinking on the distraction instead. The exception to this, don't avoid love. Gosh, I love that line. I'm going to just bookmark this right now. So we're up to page 7 of Paul Graham's essay. So don't avoid love. I have an office here in this, in my apartment where I live, and anytime my kid opens the door, knocks on the door, like I always pause what I'm doing. I let him in. I let him interrupt me. It's not all the time. It's not often. Sometime I'll be in here just like playing a couple guitar chords, unwinding after a day, and he'll want to come in and just sit with me and listen. And I always say yes. I'm never too busy for him. Because that was something that I didn't have when I was a kid, and I want to give that to him. And the whole reason I'm doing this is to be present for him. So don't avoid love. What I find is that, like, if you're trying to avoid quitting, you're actually better off embracing those little snippets of social time here and there, because that's like the antidote to burnout. I really feel that. Like, if you're so checked out from social engagement. No, there's a caveat to that. In some cases, love comes with strings attached. You may have some people. I know a lot of people have people in their lives where love comes with pathologic behavior. Love comes with toxicity. I know dudes that are in toxic marriages. One of my good friends, I have a couple good friends that are divorced, and it's no one's fault. They just married the wrong person. But the stories they tell me about those years where they were married, in those relationships, love came at a price. So that's something that you have to be crucially aware of. And I think like early on in life, you don't have a lot of context for relationships, and you don't know what toxic really is. You don't have a lot of frame of reference. But the older you get, and the more you read, I think that's a force multiplier. The more you read, you notice like patterns and behaviors. So nobody from your inner circle, ribbing aside, nobody from your inner circle should be jealous of you, or should be passive aggressive, or like cutting you down, or playing, like gaslighting, or playing dumb, or doing things that undermine your confidence or undermine your goals or your trajectory. They shouldn't be like threatened by your goals. But a lot of people are. And I think that's how you know who your true OG friends are. And sometimes you got to cut people loose and make some new OG friends. That's just how it goes. Ambition kind of scares people, especially in medicine, where a lot of your colleagues are very obedient and they've never really had a real job before. They've never really seen much of the world. They've just done really well at school, and they've been in academia their whole life, and they're really good at writing papers, and they're really good at building an impressive CV. Those are the type of people that, if they see you getting after it in a different way, they might not always be inspired by that. You'll learn who your real friends are as time goes on. So, but at the end of the day, don't avoid love. And I will just add to that I think this is the Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, like 3 major decisions in your life. They don't have a monopoly on these questions, but they certainly do a good job of rehashing it. Is that, the 3 most important decisions. I think this is also in the Almanac of Naval. So the 3 most important decisions are what you decide to do, where you decide to live, and who you decide to be with, as in like spouse. So, if your spouse, just isn't really in your corner, they're not your cheerleader, they don't want you to succeed, then, well, I think you got to cut your losses. You married the wrong person. Like if you have a major career opportunity in a certain city and you've been waiting for that, your whole life, and your spouse is not happy for you, but instead they're competing with you, that's you just checkmated yourself. And I've seen this happen a lot, to good people. I've seen it happen a lot. So you always got to be wary early on. And this is directed to the young men or the young women in the room. But I will say, I can relate a little bit more to the young men, obviously. So I think, this message is more to them, that don't shit where you eat. Don't marry somebody who is going to be competing with you professionally. That's dumb. And you should never apologize for having that mindset. We live in a really hardcore feminist culture, where it's if you're not supporting the girl bosses, you're from the dark ages, that they'll think that you're, from the Stone Age. It's no, that's not what it's about. It's about sustainability. Believe me, there are women out there who want to cheer you on as the leader of a household. They do exist. You've just been looking in the wrong places. You're not going to find them. You're not going to find them, at the bars. You're not going to find them at frat parties. You're not going to find them. You might find them at the office. It kind of depends. But we live in a very odd society, where family dynamics have changed a lot, and when it comes down to you need peace at home, period. You got enough competition out there in the arena. You don't want competition at home. That's just silly. You want tranquility, peace, quiet. That's all for today's episode of 3 Deeper Cuts, the lifestyle magazine for the practicing surgical pathologist, bringing you high signal content fueled by 10% buffered neutral formalin. I hope you enjoyed listening. I enjoyed making this for you. If you like this content, subscribe to the newsletter, 3deepercuts.substack.com. We're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And credit to Mr. Paul Graham for writing this essay. I think I got through 7 pages of that thing. We're already almost at the 1 hour mark. And I planned, I think future, maybe every 10th episode, we're just going to do a Paul Graham essay version of 3 Deeper Cuts. It's just so powerful. And that's what I have for you today. I hope you have an excellent rest of your evening. And I'm your host, Chuck G. Until next time, be well and stay curious. Bye-bye.